What if the greatest mind of our age was torn from the modern world and thrown into a time of famine, plague, and superstition? What if centuries of science and knowledge suddenly awakened in the body of a poor young man in a forgotten medieval village? This is the story of Dr. Adrian Cross, a physicist who lost everything in pursuit of truth and awoke as Alden Cross, a peasant in the kingdom of Westvale. Armed with nothing but memory and reason, he must face hunger, corruption, and betrayal, yet also find love, hope, and the meaning of family he once abandoned. Stay with me, for this is not just a tale of survival. It is the chronicle of how knowledge itself can change the fate of an age. Hadley Institute for Quantum Dynamics, Earth, a steel and glass tower on the edge of Cambridge. The building looked eternal, a monument to reason, yet inside its walls a single man carried the weight of obsession. Dr. Adrian Cross had given 40 years to equations, particles, and theories that promised to bend the fabric of reality. In doing so, he had lost almost everything else. His wife gone, his daughter estranged, nights filled not with laughter or warmth, but with the pale glow of computer screens and the ceaseless murmur of data streams. He told himself it was worth it. That knowledge itself was enough. But in the quiet hours, when the lab slept and the city outside pulsed with lives he no longer knew how to join, Adrian felt the hollowness in his chest. He had chased the infinite and become a stranger to the finite things that made men whole. Now, on this night, he stood at the heart of Project Kronos, a machine unlike any humanity had ever built. A lattice of superconducting rings, pulsing with streams of ionized plasma. Quantum sensors lined the walls, whispering of probabilities torn open and stitched again. The goal was audacious, to map human consciousness, then shift it across the quantum barrier into another substrate. Not a clone, not a copy. The same self unmoored from the cage of flesh. His colleagues had gone home. Only Adrian remained, staring at the chamber where he himself would be the first subject. He knew the risks. He knew the Institute's board had warned him to wait, but waiting was for men who still had time. Adrian felt time had already abandoned him. He adjusted the neural crown over his temples. Fingers trembled, not with fear, but with something stranger. Anticipation, hunger. A man at the end of the road, daring to step beyond it. Project Kronos, Trial Zero, he whispered, his voice rough in the sterile silence. Initiating sequence. The chamber came alive. Rings spun with magnetic howl. Lights strobed across the consoles. His mind surged with data, numbers flooding his vision as if the universe itself had become a blackboard scrawled with equations. For a heartbeat, he felt triumph. He had done it. Then the equations screamed. Probability collapsed in on itself. The lattice buckled, not physically, but in the math that underpinned matter. Adrian felt his thoughts stretch thin, pulled like molten glass. Memory, identity, all the things that made him him began to slip. No, he gasped. His voice sounded like it came from miles away. He tried to tear off the crown, but his hands no longer obeyed. Fingers dissolved into static. Vision fractured into 1,000 overlapping frames. Childhood laughter, his mother's hand, a lecture hall filled with students, equations spinning into infinity. This is the price, a thought whispered. His own or the machine's. Panic surged. Then awe. In the splitting of self he saw the vastness of the universe unspool. Threads of time stretching back to the dawn of stars, forward into the collapse of galaxies. And then, nothing. Adrian Cross ceased to be a man in a laboratory. His scream was cut short, swallowed by the collapse of light. When awareness flickered again, it was not in steel or glass. It was in the rough scent of smoke, in the weight of a body younger, leaner, clothed in coarse wool, in voices shouting, Outside a thatched cottage, his last thought before the darkness claimed him once more. Where am I? The world returned, not with the hum of machines, but with the rasp of a wooden roof beam above his eyes. Smoke clung to the air. The smell was not sterile ozone, but of ash, sweat, and earth. Adrian Cross, no, whoever he was now, gasped and rolled onto his side. The body he inhabited was lean, the muscles taut but underfed. His hands, calloused and rough, did not belong to a physicist. He staggered upright. Straw rustled under him. The walls were wattle and daub, patched with cracks that let in slivers of cold light. His breath came out visible in the chill. The voice of a woman reached him first, sharp and weary. "Alden, you're awake, thank the saints." The name struck him like a hammer. Alden. He blinked at the woman, her face weathered by labor, her and scarred from years of toil. Something inside this body knew her. The memory rose like an echo. Maeve Cross, his mother. He almost answered with mother, but the word tasted strange in his throat. Instead, he clutched his head. Two lives wrestled there, Adrian, scientist of the 21st century, and Alden, peasant youth of a village that smelled of smoke and hunger. A girl darted into view, her hair tangled, her eyes bright with worry. "Brother, you fell by the well again. You scared us." She clutched his arm with thin fingers, as if he might vanish. Alden Cross. Behind her, a younger boy peeked out, wide-eyed and pale. Tomlin to Adrian's chest tightened. Family. He had lost one in his other life. Now fate, or whatever Kronos had unleashed, had thrust another into his arms. He tried to rise, his legs unsteady, his stomach growled, empty and raw. Outside, voices of villagers drifted through, the bray of a donkey, the hammer of wood, coughing that would not stop. This was no simulation. The suffering was real. His mind screamed denial. Quantum entanglement could not deliver him into another century, another flesh. Yet the rough wool against his skin, the pain in his ribs, the warmth of Elin's small hand, these things argued louder than reason. Maeve pressed a bowl into his hands, thin broth, little more than cloudy water with a trace of barley. "Eat, Alden. You need strength." He sipped, forcing it down, each swallow reminding him of how fragile this life was compared to the world he had left. His old self longed for sterile labs and instruments. This new body craved bread, warmth, certainty. He closed his eyes. For the first time, Adrian Cross did not know which self he wanted to be, and from beyond the walls, a crow called, harsh and mocking, as if the world itself was laughing at his confusion. When Adrian stepped beyond the crooked doorway of the cottage, the village revealed itself like a wound. Stonebrook lay huddled on the bank of a sluggish stream, its huts sagging beneath thatched roofs blackened with smoke. Mud clung to every path. Children ran barefoot through filth, coughing, their faces hollow from hunger. Dogs scavenged near. Refuse heaps. The smell struck him hardest. Not the antiseptic tang of laboratories, but rot, manure, and sickness woven into the air. A woman carried a child past him, the boy's skin splotched with fever. She whispered a prayer to ward off night spirits and pressed a crude charm of bone to the child's chest. Others watched Adrian, or rather Alden, with suspicion. Their eyes held fear sharper than knives, as if a single misstep could brand him as cursed. He moved through the village in silence, absorbing the details. Buckets of water drawn from the stream, already murky and green. Bread black with mold passed as food. Men hunched with racking coughs, still dragging tools toward the fields. Adrian's scientific mind catalogued everything. Parasites in the water, respiratory disease from smoke-filled huts, malnutrition from endless porridge. But this was no case study in a journal. This was the texture of daily survival. They live like this, and they endure it, he thought, heart pounding. He had once believed loneliness in a sterile lab was suffering. But here, suffering wore flesh and bone. The villagers gathered near the chapel where a priest shouted warnings about demons that brought illness. He saw heads bow, charms raised, tears falling. They believed salvation lay in ritual, not in clean water or medicine. And when eyes flicked toward him, Adrian felt the weight of suspicion. A stranger, a misfit, even in Alden's skin. His chest ached with a strange mix of pity and rage. He wanted to tell them germs were not demons, that clean water and soap mattered more than prayers, but he bit down on the words. To speak them now would mean exile, or worse. Back in the cottage that evening, he sat beside the dying fire. Maeve, and the children asleep behind him. He stared at his rough hands, feeling both powerless and restless. This world is drowning, he whispered, and I can't just watch it sink. The resolve flickered in his eyes. Somewhere inside this chaos, the physicist stirred again. The next morning dawned grey, mist curling off the stream like a warning. Adrian crouched at its edge, watching the water swirl around his reflection. It was green with algae, streaked with waste from the animals upstream. He dipped a hand, brought it to his nose, and almost recoiled. This was the lifeblood of the village, and its poison. Behind him, Elin coughed again, her thin chest heaving. Tomlin shivered in the doorway. Maeve whispered prayers while ladling another pot of cloudy broth. Adrian's jaw tightened. If he did nothing, the cycle would repeat. Disease, hunger, death. He closed his eyes, reaching back through the vault of memory. Equations, lectures, field notes. Somewhere in the blur of decades came something simple, almost childish. Layers. Gravel, sand, charcoal. Primitive but effective, a filter that any medieval hand could build. His heart thumped. Yes, start small, prove it works. He scavenged with purpose. From the smithy's refuse pile, he found a cracked barrel. From the riverbank, buckets of sand and gravel. From the hearth, charred wood he ground into powder. The villagers watched him with narrowed eyes as he carried the strange collection past their huts. Bram Kestrel sneered loud enough for all to hear. What's Alden up to now, digging his own grave? Laughter followed, but Adrian ignored it. He could not argue superstition with words. He would answer with results. At the cottage, he stacked the materials inside the barrel. Stones first, then gravel, then fine sand, then a thick layer of charcoal. He poured a jug of foul river water through. For long moments, nothing happened. Then, drop by drop, clear water began to seep from a hole he had cut near the bottom. Elin gasped. It's clean. Adrian lifted the cup, sunlight catching the liquid. It was not perfect, but it was transparent. The stench gone. He tasted it, heart racing. It was water he would dare give to a child. He turned to Maeve, his voice low but steady. Boil it first, then give it to Tomlin. He'll cough less. She hesitated, torn between fear and hope. Finally she nodded. For the first time since awakening in this world, Adrian felt the weight in his chest ease. He had struck a spark against the darkness, small, fragile, but real. And outside, the crow that had mocked him the day before was silent. 2 days after the filter began to trickle clean water, a commotion rose in the village square. Shouts, angry and sharp, cut through the morning air. Adrian, still struggling to answer to the name Alden, pushed through the crowd. What he saw stopped him cold. A young woman stood in the center, wrists bound with coarse rope. Her dark hair clung to her face, eyes wide but unflinching. Around her feet lay bundles of herbs, crushed and scattered as if they were evidence of a crime. Villagers spat words like stones. Witchcraft! Marta Pike's shrill voice pierced the air. She poisons our children with her brews. She brings the fevers. Others echoed. Fear feeding fear. Men muttered about curses, women clutched charms, children hid behind skirts. And Elawan Hart, though he did not yet know her name, stood alone against them all. Adrian's gut twisted. He had seen this before, not in life, but in history books and films, the timeless pattern of ignorance turning healer into criminal. He stepped closer. "What proof do you have?" His voice cut through the din, steadier than he expected. Marta sneered. "You defend her? Then maybe you share her craft." Laughter rippled. Eyes turned toward him, suspicion ready to ignite. Adrian forced himself not to flinch. He picked up one of the crushed herbs, rubbed the leaf between his fingers, and held it to his nose. The sharp, clean scent of willow bark filled his senses. His mind supplied the knowledge: salicin, precursor to aspirin. "She gives willow bark to those in pain," he said, his words slow, deliberate. "Not poison, medicine. That is why fevers break." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some muttered, uncertain now. Adrian pressed harder, his heart pounding. "If you burn her, you burn the only one trying to help you. Do you want your children to suffer longer, or do you want them healed?" Silence. The weight of his challenge hung heavy. Finally, an old man coughed, eyes averted. Another woman pulled her sick child closer, as if rethinking. The crowd's anger faltered, crumbled. Marta hissed, but stepped back. The ropes were cut. Eloan's eyes met his then, clear, fierce, a spark of gratitude beneath the exhaustion. She did not speak, but she didn't have to. In that moment, Adrian knew he had made an ally, and perhaps unknowingly lit the first thread of something far deeper. Stonebrook Village, Kingdom of Westvale. The mist lifted from the River Aster, carrying with it the damp smell of rot. Children coughed in the lanes, their thin bodies curled against the cold. Mothers whispered charms against fever. Men spat into the mud and blamed spirits for every death. Alden Cross, Adrian trapped in another century, knew better. He had seen the microbes through glass lenses in another life. Here, unseen killers moved from hand to hand, cup to cup, drop to drop. And standing across from him, rope marks still faint on her wrists, was Elawan Hart. She carried a basket of herbs, chin lifted though half the village still muttered "witch" when she passed. Their eyes met, not as strangers anymore, but as two outcasts who had both faced the noose of fear. "We can change this," Adrian said quietly. His voice had the edge of a man used to commanding equations, not people. "If they drink cleaner water, if they wash, if they use these herbs with reason, disease will break." Elowan studied him, her gaze wary but bright. "They don't want reason. They want blessings. You saw how they looked at me." "Then we'll show them," he replied. "Not preach, show." So began their unlikely partnership. Adrian built simple basins lined with ash and sand, instructing villagers to pour boiling water through. Elowan prepared salves of garlic, thyme, and willow bark. Together they walked from door to door. Some slammed doors shut, others spat at the ground, but a few, desperate mothers, tired fathers, let them in. He watched Elowan kneel beside a feverish child, her hands steady as she laid a cool cloth on the boy's head. He explained in simple words how heat left the body through skin, how the cloth drew it away. At first they laughed, then the child's breathing eased. The laughter died. Hope stirred. In the evenings, they sat by the hearth in Maeve's cottage, notes scribbled on scraps of parchment Leora Penhale had given them. Eluan spoke of plants she had gathered from Brackenwald Forest, and Adrian translated her lore into patterns of cause and effect. He admired her courage. She admired his certainty. Both were surprised by how quickly trust grew between them. Yet the shadows never lifted fully. Marta Pike hissed that Alden and Elawan brewed dark potions. Bram Kestrel spat the word sorcerer as Adrian passed. And Osric Pike muttered about losing coin if the sick no longer needed the Millers Guild's grain-soaked tonics. Suspicion thickened around them even as their cures spread. One night, as they left a cottage where a child's fever had finally broken, Elowan stopped him on the path. Her eyes reflected the lantern's glow, fierce and unafraid. "You put yourself in danger for me," she whispered. "Why?" Adrian hesitated. How could he explain a lifetime of regret, a family lost in another world, a hunger to redeem wasted years? He only said, "Because knowledge means nothing if it dies with us." Eloan's lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time since he had awoken in this body, he felt less alone. Stonebrook still coughed and groaned under the weight of poverty. But here, in the mud and smoke, the first seeds of change had been planted. Not by a lone physicist lost in time, by two outcasts who refused to let ignorance rule. And though the village did not yet know it, the tide had begun to turn. The forge at the edge of Stonebrook beat like a heart of iron. Sparks burst against the gloom, showers of orange falling on soot-blackened walls. Bridget Ashdown, sleeves rolled high, swung the hammer with arms corded from years of work. The anvil sang with every strike, but frustration tightened her jaw. The iron refused to take shape the way she wanted. Adrian, still Alden to them, stood in the doorway, coughing from the thick smoke. He had come not for warmth, but because he had watched too many tools break under weak steel. If Stonebrook was to survive hunger and sickness, they needed better than cracked plowshares and brittle nails. Bridget noticed him but did not lower the hammer. "What are you staring at? Never seen a woman swing harder than you can." Her tone cut sharp, but he only smiled faintly. "I've seen strength. What I don't see is air enough for that fire." She frowned, wiping sweat from her brow. "The bellows work. They've worked since my father's time." "They work," he admitted, stepping closer, "but not well enough. The air comes in bursts, uneven. The fire cools between strokes. That's why your iron fights you." Bridget leaned on the hammer, skeptical. "And you know this because you're suddenly master smith as well as healer?" "No," Adrian said, voice steady. "I know it because fire is just a reaction. Oxygen feeds it. The hotter and steadier the flow, the stronger the flame. You don't need more strength. You need more breath." She narrowed her eyes. "More breath from what? Your magic barrels?" He ignored the jab and studied the bellows, an old cracked leather skin pumping air in ragged sighs. His mind flickered back to textbooks, diagrams of pistons and valves. He knelt, sketching lines in the ash with a piece of charcoal, twin chambers, alternating strokes, one pushing while the other filled. Continuous flow. Bridget crouched beside him, curiosity breaking through her scorn. Two bellows, working together. He nodded. So the fire never rests. Skepticism lingered, but the idea lit a spark in her eyes. They worked side by side, tearing scraps of wood and stitching rough leather Maeve had spared. Hours passed. Bridget's strength joined with his strange precision, a rhythm they did not expect. Sweat dripped, ash streaked their arms, but the shape took form. When they tested it, the fire roared to life. A steady, hungry glow filled the forge, brighter and hotter than she had ever seen. Bridget stepped back, eyes wide, as the iron blazed white. She whispered, almost to herself, "It breathes." Adrian smiled. "Ashdown bellows," he said, "stronger than any hammer." For a moment, pride softened her usual edge. She looked at him not as the strange boy meddling in everyone's work, but as someone who might actually change Stonebrook's fate. "Maybe you're more than just a healer," she admitted. The forge light caught her face, fierce and resolute. Adrian felt a warmth he had not expected, not from the fire, but from the beginning of respect. In this place of iron and smoke, another seed had been sown. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside the forge, the fire did not falter. Stonebrook shifted in small but undeniable ways. The coughing eased in cottages where Eloan's herbs and Adrian's boiling water found their way. Children no longer cried through the night with burning fevers. Farmers smiled when plowshares from the Ashdown forge held longer in the soil. the iron harder and truer under Bridget's hammer. For the first time in years, the village breathed something like hope, and hope has a way of unsettling those who thrive on fear. Bram Kestrel's glare followed Adrian everywhere. The broad-shouldered bully had ruled Stonebrook's lanes through intimidation, his fists more trusted than his word. Now men he once cowed began to nod at Alden Cross, offering quiet thanks. Bram spat in the dirt. "Think yourself a hero? You're nothing but Maeve's starving son playing sorcerer." Osric Pike shared the resentment, though his reason was coin. The miller's nephew counted every grain that passed through his family's hands. Whispers spread that if sickness waned, if hunger eased, fewer would buy the miracle powders the guild sold at inflated price. Watching Alden gain respect cut Osric like a blade. Then there was Marta Pike, her tongue sharp as thorns. She muttered at gatherings that Alden consorted with witches, pointing at Eloan whenever she appeared with her bundle of herbs. "Mark my words," Marta hissed to neighbours. "He brings strange water and fire to Stonebrook. Next will come curses." Her gossip travelled faster than healing ever could. Adrian felt the tension every time he walked the muddy paths. Gratitude in some eyes, hatred in others. It was a balance as fragile as glass. At night, in the quiet of the Cross cottage, Maeve urged caution. "You help them, yes, but men like Bram, like the Pikes, they don't forgive easily. Keep your head low, Alden." But Adrian had never been built to keep his head low. In his other life, he had pursued knowledge against every warning. Here, too, he felt the same iron pull. "If I stop now," he whispered to Elin as she drifted to sleep, "the village falls back into sickness, and I won't watch that happen." What he did not yet know was that jealousy seldom stayed at words. Already Bram's fists itched for blood. Osric plotted with quiet spite, and Marta's whispers sought to fan suspicion into fire. The seeds of change had sprouted in Stonebrook, but in the shadows, seeds of envy were taking root as well. It began with whispers and ended with a fire. One evening, as dusk bled across the thatched roofs, Bram Kestrel and Osric Pike cornered Marta outside the chapel. The three spoke in low, urgent voices, plotting not with reason, but with resentment. Alden Cross had grown too bold, too praised. If the villagers saw him fail, if they believed his cures brought harm instead of hope, the tide would turn back to fear, and the balance of power would be restored. The plan was crude, born of spite. Bram would break one of the Stonebrook filters, filling it with filth scraped from the ditch. Osric would spread word that Alden's water had sickened children. Marta would carry the tale from door to door, her sharp tongue dripping venom. And for a night it worked. A child fell ill, already weak, but the timing gave weight to the lie. Villagers gathered in the square, angry murmurs rising. Alden stood before them, Eloan at his side, her face pale but resolute. "He poisons us," Bram bellowed, shoving the broken filter into the crowd's view. "See what his false tricks bring? Our children cough blood," Marta shrieked. "Witchcraft! Witchcraft! I told you." For a moment Adrian felt the weight of history pressing down, the witch hunts, the fear of reason. He could almost hear the crackle of torches, feel the rope around his neck, but he steadied himself. Fear would not serve him here, proof would. He pushed forward, taking the broken barrel from Bram's hands. The smell alone betrayed it. Rot, and dung deliberately packed inside. "This isn't mine," he said calmly, his voice carrying across the restless square. "You can see it. No sand, no charcoal, no careful layers, just filth." He turned to the villagers. "You've seen the real filters. You've tasted their water. Did it sicken you, or did it save your children?" A silence fell. Eyes shifted. Mothers clutched their little ones who had grown stronger since drinking from Alden's filters. One by one, voices rose, not in accusation, but in defense. "My boy sleeps without fever now." My husband's cough eased. The water no longer stinks. Bram's sneer faltered. Osric's face paled. Marta's mouth opened but found no words. Adrian's chest tightened with both relief and resolve. He had not needed to shout, to fight, to curse. Truth had spoken louder. The crowd began to disperse. Their anger dissolved into shame for almost believing the lie. Elawan touched his arm gently, pride flickering in her eyes. For the first time, Adrian felt the fragile beginnings of authority, not imposed by force, not demanded by fear, earned by action, and defended by those who had seen the results with their own eyes. Bram and the Pikes slunk into the shadows, but their hatred did not die. Adrian knew they would strike again. Yet tonight, in this square of mud and whispers, he had proved something vital. In a world drowning in superstition, truth could stand on its own legs, and it would not be so easily toppled. The turning point came not with a grand battle, but with the steady rhythm of daily life reshaped. Weeks passed since Bram's failed scheme. The Stonebrook filters continued to run clear. Eloin's herbs saved more than they lost, and the forge fire of Bridget Ashdown burned hotter than ever with the new bellows. Slowly, the weight of suspicion gave way to something rarer in Stonebrook: trust. It showed first in small gestures. A farmer leaving a bundle of grain at Maeve's door in thanks. Children chasing after Alden down the muddy path, calling his name not in mockery, but in admiration. Old men nodding respectfully when he passed, as though the boy they once dismissed had stepped into a role none of them expected. Then came the harvest. The fields, though still thin and weary from years of blight, yielded more than they had in seasons past. Villagers gathered in the square, arms aching from the work, but spirits high. The talk turned not to omens or demons, but to the simple, practical things Alden had taught: clean water, careful washing, stronger tools. Brother Thomas from St. Ives Abbey arrived with supplies of bread and salves. He clasped Alden's shoulder firmly. "Your father Garin was a good man, but you, Alden, you may carry more than his strength, perhaps the wisdom of an age yet to come." Adrian felt the words settle heavy in his chest. He was no longer only Dr. Adrian Cross, the physicist, who had wasted a life in sterile halls. Nor was he just Alden, the poor boy struggling to feed his family. He was becoming something in between, a bridge. That night, as the village shared bread and ale beneath lantern light, Maeve smiled for the first time in years. Elin leaned against his side, whispering, "They look at you different now." Tomlin, eyes bright, added, "You make them safe." He looked around at faces once marked only by hunger and fear. Now they carried a fragile hope, and for the first time since waking in this strange past, Adrian felt that perhaps his being here was not an accident, but a calling. Yet as he raised his cup to the cheering crowd, he saw Bram Kestrel watching from the shadows, Osric Pike whispering at his side, and Marta's sharp eyes glinting with spite. Trust had been won, but enemies still lingered. Still, in this moment, under the glow of fire and laughter, Alden Cross stood not as an outcast, but as the pillar Stonebrook leaned upon. And he knew this was only the beginning. Ravenford Market. Road, Kingdom of Westvale. The air smelled of grain and sweat, voices rising in barter and gossip. Adrian, living as Alden, had come with Bridget to trade iron nails and tools forged with the new bellows. Yet what caught his eye was not the wares, but the woman kneeling at a stall, quill in hand, a quill, ink, parchment. In Stonebrook, words were carried by tongues, not pages. But here, this woman wrote as if it were second nature. Her script flowed with precision, her eyes sharp behind a veil of grief. Adrian stopped mid-step, his mind spun. In this world, someone could record, not just remember, knowledge. Bridget nudged him. "That's Leora Penhale, widow of a clerk, lives alone near the chapel. Folk whisper she's proud because she can read." Leora looked up then, noticing his stare. Instead of shrinking back like others often did, she held his gaze, calm, curious. Later that evening, when the market thinned, Adrian approached her modest cottage. He found her at a small desk, parchment stacked neatly beside a guttering candle. She raised a brow. "You're Alden Cross, the boy who makes strange barrels and speaks like a scholar." Her tone held neither scorn nor admiration, only interest. Adrian felt his chest tighten. For the first time since waking in this body, he faced someone who might understand even a fragment of his lost world. He nodded slowly. "And you can write," she gave a dry smile. "Few here value it. My husband kept the records for Ravenford. When the fever took him, the guild said a woman's hand had no place in their ledgers. So I write for myself now." Adrian stepped closer, voice urgent. "Would you write for me?" She studied him, weighing the question. "What do you need written, Alden?" He hesitated, then spread rough notes across her table. Charcoal sketches of the Stonebrook filter, diagrams of airflow from the Ashdown bellows, simple instructions for boiling water and mixing soap. "These are things the village must remember, not just stories, instructions. If they're written, they can outlive me." For the first time, Leora's eyes softened. She touched the drawings carefully, as though they were fragile relics. "You think like a man from another time," she murmured. He almost laughed at the truth buried in her words. "Perhaps I do." That night they worked together. Adrian spoke of layers of sand and charcoal, and Leora translated them into steady lines of script. She asked sharp questions, forcing him to explain simply, clearly. Her ink-stained fingers kept pace with his racing mind, turning fleeting memory into permanence. In her, Adrian felt a shift. Elowen had given him trust. Bridget had given him respect. Now Leora gave him something deeper. Continuity. A way to pass knowledge beyond his own tongue, beyond his own lifetime. When dawn touched the cottage windows, Leora set down the quill. "If you are right, Alden Cross, these words may change more than Stonebrook. But words are dangerous. They travel. They reach ears you may not wish to hear." Adrian looked at the pages. The first written record of ideas, centuries ahead of their time. A strange awe filled him. For the first time, he felt the weight of legacy. Not just survival, not just healing. Legacy. Word traveled faster than wagons. By midsummer, the name Alden Cross was no longer just muttered in the smoke of Stonebrook's cottages. It was spoken in Ravenford taverns, repeated by traders who passed along the River Aster, and eventually carried by men who answered to coin. Rather than conscience, the story changed with every telling. Some said Alden could draw sickness out of children with a glance. Others claimed he commanded fire hotter than any forge. Martyr Pike whispered to travellers that he made charms in secret with a Lowen heart, and Bram, eager to wound, boasted that Alden thought himself above priests and reeves alike. Each tale bent truth, yet even distorted, they spread one undeniable fact. The boy from Stonebrook was changing things. Filters that made water clear, soap that left hands free of grime, bellows that gave fire new strength. Innovations that lifted peasants from misery, innovations no reeve or guild had approved. It was Osric Pike who carried the poison news to Godric Fen. In Hymir, the reeve of the Grey March sat fat in his chair, poring over ledgers more than laws. His mind was not quick, but it was always alert to threats, especially threats to his purse. "My Lord Reeve," Osric said with oily reverence, "this Alden Cross stirs trouble. The people call him saviour, but he makes tools and brews outside guild sanction. He teaches without license. And he grows popular. Too popular." Fen frowned, tapping his jewelled ring against the table. "Popular peasants breed unrest. And unrest breeds disobedience. He undermines order," Osric pressed. "Today it is water and soap. Tomorrow, who can say? The reeve leaned back, his eyes narrowing. He had no interest in sickly villagers or clean water. But if this Alden disrupted trade, if fewer coins flowed through guild hands, then the Crown Exchequer would take notice, and questions might land at his door. That he could not allow. "Send word," Fen ordered. "Let Bailiff Voss ride to Stonebrook. See if this Alden Cross is miracle work or fraud, and if he is trouble, remind him where power rests." Osric bowed, a thin smile cutting across his face. He had sown the seed. Now Fen would water it with suspicion. Back in Stonebrook, Adrian sensed the shift before news arrived. Villagers whispered of strangers asking questions in Ravenford. Elowen warned him of martyrs' tales growing wilder. Bridget noticed eyes watching him from market shadows. Even Leora grew tense, reminding him that written words travelled farther than whispers. One evening, as he closed the cottage door against the chill, Maeve spoke softly. "Your father taught me once that when men in power know your name, it is never blessing, only burden." Adrian looked at the filter barrels, lined neatly outside, at Tomlin filling one with clean water. He felt pride and dread. His inventions had begun as survival. Now they had become signals, bright enough to catch the gaze of men who ruled by fear. For the first time he understood, the danger ahead would not come from disease or famine alone. It would come from those who feared change more than death itself. The sound of hooves came first, hard, relentless, echoing down the muddy lane that cut through Stonebrook. Villagers froze at their doors. Children darted behind skirts. Only the crows on the chapel steeple dared to caw as the horsemen drew near. At their head rode a man built like a battering ram, wrapped in black leather and steel, a cudgel hanging. At his side, Torben Voss, bailiff of the Grey March, the long arm of Reeve Godric Fen. Adrian watched from the doorway of Maeve's cottage, the unease in his chest thick as the smoke curling from the hearth. He had read of men like this in history books, functionaries who ruled with fists instead of minds, but standing in Alden's skin, there was no page of text to buffer the fear. Only the sight of villagers bowing low, their eyes averted, their silence brittle. Voss dismounted with a thud. His gaze swept the lane like a predator weighing prey. "So," he growled, "this is Stonebrook. And where is the boy who thinks himself wiser than guild and crown?" Nobody answered. No one dared. Until Adrian stepped forward, his heart steady, though his pulse hammered. "I am Alden Cross." The bailiff's eyes narrowed. "You?" He barked a laugh that carried no humor. "A peasant pup teaching peasants to forget their place?" Adrian held his ground. "I teach nothing but clean water and honest work. That is no crime." Voss's face darkened. He seized a nearby filter barrel, heaving it into the dirt. Water spilled, soaking the mud. "This," he spat, "a trick to make fools believe you a sorcerer. What license have you? What seal?" Elowen stepped forward, fists clenched. "He saved children with that water. If it's sorcery, then may the whole village be bewitched." Gasps rippled. Brave words could cost lives. Voss turned, raising his hand as if to strike her. Adrian moved, instinctively, stepping between them, his voice cut sharp. "Touch her, and the village will see you fear truth more than lies." The bailiff froze, surprise flickering in his eyes. Few dared defy him openly. He lowered his hand slowly, but his grin was cold. "You speak well for a mud-born. Perhaps too well." He circled Adrian like a wolf, then turned to the crowd. "Hear me, Stonebrook. Reeve Fen watches. If this Cross oversteps again, if he dares challenge guild or crown, you will all pay the price." With that, he mounted his horse, wheeled it about, and thundered back down the lane, his men scattering mud in their wake. The silence he left behind was suffocating. Villagers whispered, fear rekindled. Marta's eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. Bram smirked. Osric muttered of justice. But others, mothers who had buried sick children, fathers whose tools no longer broke, looked at Alden differently. Not as a boy playing scholar, as a man who had stood before power and not bowed. That night, Adrian sat outside the cottage, staring at the dark forest edge. His hands trembled only when no one watched. Elin crept out and sat beside him. "You weren't afraid," she whispered. "I was terrified," he admitted softly. "But fear means nothing if you let it decide who you are." He looked toward the stars, hidden behind clouds. In his old life, he had faced failure in equations, experiments, careers. Here, failure could mean death. Yet for the first time, he felt the shape of something greater pressing on him. Responsibility. Torben Voss would return. Godric Fenn would not forget. But neither would the villagers forget that Alden Cross had not bowed. And that truth, Adrian realized, was its own kind of power. In the weeks after Bailiff Voss's visit, Stonebrook lived under a shadow. Villagers worked with eyes lowered, their laughter dimmed by the memory of hooves and threats, yet the filters still flowed, the forge still blazed, and Elowen's herbs still healed. Progress crept forward, though every step felt as if watched by unseen eyes. And indeed it was. From Ravenford, Reeve Godric Fenn sent word that Alden Cross's contraptions were to be inspected again. This time, no bailiff thundered in with cudgel raised. Instead, Fenn chose subtler poison, rumours carried by Marta Pike, whispers that Alden's filters poisoned wells, that his soap left burns, that his bellows spread fire too fierce for safety. The stories slithered through cottages like smoke. Adrian felt the shift in glances. Men who once greeted him with nods now looked away. Mothers hesitated before accepting clean water. Even Brother Thomas, who had once praised Alden's courage, came quietly to the cottage one evening. "Be careful, my son," the monk said. "Fenn is not a man to confront with reason. He will not fight you in the square. He will let fear eat at you until your own people turn away." The warning proved true soon enough. One morning Bridget burst into the cottage, soot smeared across her cheek. "The forge is burning too hot," she panted. "They say your bellows cursed it." Adrian ran with her, heart hammering. At the smithy, a crowd gathered. The Ashdown bellows hissed and groaned, fire roaring white-hot, iron warping inside the flames. Osric stood nearby, smug. "See? His devices betray us." But Adrian pushed through the smoke. His eyes caught the floor instantly, the leather seal cut, not by wear but by a knife, a deliberate wound. Sabotage. Who touched this? He demanded. The crowd muttered, uncertain. Bridget's face darkened with fury. This was no accident. Adrian lifted the cut leather high for all to see. This is not the failure of invention. This is the work of a hand that fears change. Gasps rose. Even the skeptics could see the truth of the clean slice. Osric's smirk faltered. Marta tried to shout him down, but Bridget silenced her with a glare, sharp as steel. Slowly, the mood shifted again. Villagers who had doubted only moments before now murmured in support. A farmer clapped Alden's shoulder. "My plough holds better since your work. I'll not turn against you for lies." Fenn's scheme had failed. The attempt to sow doubt had only sharpened the villagers' loyalty. That night, as quiet returned, Adrian sat with Leora in her cottage, watching her record the day's events on parchment. "You see," she said softly, "even when they try to cut you down, truth holds." But Adrian shook his head. No, Fenn failed here, yes, but this proves something worse. He's watching, and men like him, they do not stop. They wait. They plan. He looked at the written pages, at the fragile permanence of ink on parchment. For the first time, the words felt heavy, almost dangerous. He was no longer just a healer or a tinkerer. He had become a target, and that knowledge, colder than fear, settled into his bones. The river Aster wound silver beneath the autumn moon, its current carrying both silt and secrets. Adrian stood on its bank, studying the creak of the old mill wheel as it turned in fits and starts. The Millers' Guild had long claimed it as their dominion, taking more grain than they returned, binding villagers in debt. Each groan of the wheel was a reminder of injustice embedded in wood and stone. A voice broke the quiet. "It's crooked, isn't it? Not just the wheel, the whole way of things." He turned. A young woman stood in the half-light, cloak drawn tight against the wind. Her eyes were sharp, restless, with a fire that reminded him of Brigid, but tempered by calculation. "Seraphine Dale," she introduced herself before he asked. "My uncle runs this mill. You know what that means?" Adrian nodded slowly. "Guild. Power, taxes on hunger." She stepped closer, her voice low. "I'm tired of it. The guild grows fat while children in Stonebrook starve. My uncle says it's tradition. I say tradition is a leash." There was defiance in her words, but also risk. Speaking against the guild was no small act. Adrian studied her, sensing both danger and opportunity. "Why come to me?" "Because," Seraphine said, folding her arms, "you don't just talk about change. You build it. Filters, bellows, soap, things that work, things that shame the guild. I want a mill that serves people, not bleeds them. Help me build it." Adrian felt the pull of history pressing again. In his old world, industries rose on inventions like this. Mills that freed hands, systems that shifted power. Here, such a thing could ignite rebellion. Yet looking at Seraphine, her jaw set, her courage unflinching, he knew the spark was already lit. He drew a quick sketch in the dirt with a stick. "If we widen the wheel, add channels to guide the water, use smoother bearings, the river has strength enough for 2 mills. One could be for the guild, one for the village." Her eyes widened, catching the shape of possibility. "A mill of our own." "Yes," Adrian said softly, "but it must be hidden until it's ready. If Fen or the guild hear too soon, they'll crush it before it turns its first wheel." Seraphine extended her hand. "Then we keep it between us. For now." He clasped it, the deal sealed in silence. For the first time since Voss's threats, Adrian felt not just defensive, but daring. He was no longer reacting to attacks. He was planting something new, with allies as bold as himself. As Seraphine slipped back into the night, the river's voice filled the dark, steady, relentless, carrying the promise of change. Adrian stood watching, knowing that with every invention, every ally, his shadow grew longer in the eyes of those who ruled. And though hope stirred, so too did the certainty. The storms of power were coming. Grey March, kingdom of Westvale. Autumn winds carried a sour smell across the fields. What should have been golden seas of barley and wheat were now blackened patches, stalks bent and broken, heads of grain swollen with foul rot. From the cottages of Stonebrook to the far edges of Ravenford's market farms, the same horror spread. Bread turned to ash before it even touched the oven. Adrian Alden stood at the edge of a field, boots sinking in the damp soil. He plucked a head of barley, crushed it between his fingers, and felt the slimy residue cling to his skin. A memory jolted through him, claviceps purpurea, ergot, a fungus that once starved villages in his own world, twisting bread into poison. He rubbed the black dust between his palms and whispered under his breath, "It's not just hunger, it's sickness." Behind him, Elowen's voice wavered. "The children cough after eating bread from these fields. They see visions. Some shake with fits." Her words cut deeper than the wind. He remembered history lessons, hallucinations, convulsions, madness. This was no simple harvest failure. It was a plague written into the grain itself. Leora Penhale, ink stains smudging her fingertips, stood close, recording every observation. "You're saying this spreads through the seed, not the soil?" "Yes," Adrian said, voice tight. Once it infects, it travels with every kernel. You can't wash it away. You can't pray it clean. He closed his fist. The harvest is lost. Silence fell. Only the crows dared to cry over the ruined field. Word travelled fast. By nightfall the square filled with voices, wails of mothers, shouts of angry men, frightened murmurs about curses. Martyr Pike claimed it was Alden's fault. He meddled with wells and fire. Now the earth itself spits him out. Bram roared agreement, fists clenched, while Osric whispered that the Millers' Guild would never recover. Adrian faced the crowd, heart pounding. He wanted to speak of spores, of parasitic cycles, of solutions that belonged to a century yet unborn, but he saw only fear in their eyes. He forced his words to slow, to match their world. This blight is no witchcraft. It's a sickness of the grain. We cannot eat it. If we do, we die. Gasps. A woman clutched her child tighter. Then, "What do we eat?" a farmer shouted. "The stores are near empty. Winter comes." The weight of their desperation pressed on him. He had no easy answer. In his old life, he had studied energy fields, quantum theories, particles that danced invisible. Here, none of it mattered. Here, survival was measured in bread. Bridget Ashdown stepped forward, soot still on her arms from the forge. "We can hunt, we can fish, but that won't feed all." Her voice cracked, not through winter. Adrian closed his eyes. He remembered greenhouses, irrigation canals, systems of resilience. He remembered how civilizations survived when fields failed, by finding water, turning barren ground fertile again. A spark ignited in the darkness of his mind. But tonight, in the square, all he could offer was resolve. He raised his voice steady against the storm of panic. "We will not starve. There is a way. But we must stand together." The words echoed, fragile but firm. Some doubted, some wept. Yet in the eyes of Elowen, Bridget and Leora, he saw flickers of belief, small flames in the cold. Later, by the hearth, Maeve touched his shoulder. "Alden," she whispered, "you speak as your father once did, when the river flooded, when wolves took the lambs. He said the same, we will not starve." And he was right. Adrian felt the weight of her trust, heavier than any scientific principle he had ever carried. He looked at Tomlin and Elin, faces pale with hunger, and knew failure was no longer an option. Outside, the fields lay dead, stalks rotting in the frost. But in his chest, a plan began to take shape, a canal carved from the river Aster, water bending to will, earth forced to yield life again. The great blight had come, famine loomed, and for the first time, Adrian realized his fight was no longer for one village. It was for survival itself. Stonebrook, Grey March, Kingdom of Westvale Frost still lingered on the ruined fields when Adrian gathered the villagers in the square. The smell of rot clung to every breath. Fear hung thicker than the morning mist. He stood before them not as a lord or priest, but as a man with dirt still under his nails, and desperation burning behind his eyes. "We cannot eat the grain," he said, lifting a fistful of blackened barley. "The blight has poisoned it, but the river still runs. If the fields betray us, then we will bend the river itself to our will." The villagers stared, uncomprehending. "A canal," Adrian continued, his voice steady. "We cut a channel from the Aster, bring water to new ground, crops that do not rely on blighted seed, beans, turnips, cabbage, food to keep us through winter." A murmur spread. Some scoffed. Others crossed themselves. Martyr Pike sneered. "Dig a river with bare hands. Fools talk." But Bridget Ashdown stepped forward, arms crossed, soot still smeared across her brow. "If he says it can be done, I'll swing the first pick. Better that than watch children starve." That broke the silence. Slowly heads nodded. One by one, calloused hands lifted. So it began. The first days were chaos. Men and women hacked at the earth with crude shovels, breaking more tools than soil. Adrian sketched designs in the mud, how to angle the slope, how to line the channel, with stone to prevent collapse. Bridget modified ploughshares into digging blades, while Master Rowan Hale crafted wooden carts to haul soil. Elowen tended the wounded hands blistered by the work, her herbs soothing raw skin. Seraphine Dale surprised them all. She rode from the mill with sacks of beans and seed cabbage hidden under her cloak. "The guild would see us starve," she told Adrian, fire in her voice, "but the river will feed us instead." For weeks, the sound of labor drowned the village. Picks struck rock, children carried baskets of earth, even Maeve stood among them, steadying the younger workers. Adrian moved constantly, guiding, calculating, showing how to brace a wall with timber, how to angle the spillway. Each night he collapsed by the hearth, muscles burning, but his mind alive with something he had never felt in laboratories or lecture halls: purpose. One afternoon, as the canal neared halfway, disaster struck. The wall of a trench buckled under the weight of waterlogged soil. A boy slipped, tumbling into the collapsing earth. Screams rose. Without thinking, Adrian leapt in, mud swallowing him to the waist. He clawed forward, seized the boy's arm, and heaved with everything he had. The wall groaned. Soil cascaded around them. Bridget hurled herself into the pit, adding her strength. Together, gasping, they dragged the boy free as the trench gave way behind them. Silence followed, broken only by the boy's ragged breathing. The villagers looked, not at the boy, not at the broken wall, but at Alden Cross, chest heaving, clothes caked with mud, eyes fierce with refusal. He shouted through his exhaustion, voice cracking, "We will not stop. This canal will live, or we will die trying." The cheer that rose was raw, defiant, unstoppable. Days bled into nights. Slowly, the channel carved its way across the land like a scar of hope. Villagers sang as they worked, voices rough but steady. Children carried water skins. Elowen moved from trench to trench, tending cuts and fevers. Leora recorded every step in careful script. At last, they reached the river. Adrian directed the final cuts with trembling hands. "Brace the gate. When we open it, the current will try to tear everything away." Bridget slammed wedges into place. Rowan tightened the ropes. The villagers gathered. Breath held as Adrian raised his arm. Now, the wooden gate shifted. A roar like thunder filled the air. Water surged forward, frothing, furious, tearing into the new channel. Soil shook, stones rattled. For one terrifying moment, Adrian thought the walls would collapse. But the bracing held. The current slowed, then settled, filling the canal with shimmering life. The villagers erupted. Cheers, tears, prayers. Children splashed at the water's edge. Mothers fell to their knees, weeping with relief. Bridget laughed, pounding Adrian's back hard enough to nearly drop him. "By the forge, you mad bastard, it works." Adrian stared at the flowing water, his chest tight. For months, he had fought. To survive, to heal, to defend. But now, for the first time, he had built something greater than himself. A promise carved into the earth. Maeve touched his arm, her voice soft but sure. "Your father would be proud." Elowen stood nearby, eyes shining. "You gave them hope, Alden. Hope they can touch." He shook his head. "Not hope. Food. Hope feeds the spirit, but this," he pointed to the rushing water, "this feeds the body." That night, as the canal shimmered under moonlight, Adrian sat with Leora by the bank. She wrote by lantern glow, ink scratching across parchment. "What do you call it?" she asked. He thought a moment, then smiled faintly. "The Aster Canal, a lifeline for Stonebrook." She looked at him over the quill. "You've done more than save a village. You've defied famine itself." Adrian's smile faded. In the distance he saw shadows moving, Osric Pike whispering to strangers, Marta gesturing with sharp hands. Bram scowling in silence, and beyond them he imagined Reeve Fenn's watchful eyes and Bailiff Voss's cruel grin. He exhaled slowly. For now, we eat, but they will not let this stand. The water flowed on, unstoppable. So too did the tide of conflict that it had unleashed. Ravenford Road, Grey March. The Aster Canal flowed steady now, green shoots sprouting where once there had been only dust and rot. For Stonebrook, it was a miracle of sweat and will. But to Godric Fenn, Reeve of the Grey March, it was something else entirely, a threat to the order that lined his purse. In his hall, fat with wine and ledgers, Fenn scowled at the reports. A canal dug by peasants, new crops in barren fields. If they can feed themselves, why would they pay my levies? Torben Voss, ever the blunt cudgel, spat into the fire. Then we make them pay anyway. Hunger is a whip, and I know how to use it. And so the whip came down. Word spread that all grain, beans and root crops grown in the Grey March must pass through Fenn's tithe barns. None could be sold or stored without his seal. Soldiers rode into Stonebrook, led by Osric Pike with smug delight, and nailed the decree to the chapel door. Martyr Pike crowed to the villagers. See, Alden's tricks mean nothing. Fenn owns your harvest. Always has. Always will. The crowd bristled, but fear held their tongues. It did not hold Adrian. He tore the decree from the wood, voice sharp. This canal was dug by our hands. These crops belong to our children's mouths, not Fenn's coffers. Voss answered with his cudgel, slamming it into the mud at Adrian's feet. The ground shuddered. Careful, boy. Law is what I say it is. Disobedience is treason. The conflict sharpened. Soldiers prowled the canal, collecting seed meant for winter. Bridget Ashdown stood in the trenches with her hammer raised, refusing to move. You'll have to drag me before you take a single sack. A standoff turned violent. Iron met wood, fists met flesh. Blood spattered the canal banks before the soldiers withdrew, leaving two farmers beaten, one nearly broken. Adrian tended their wounds with trembling hands, fury burning in his chest. This was no longer about science or invention. This was power grinding down hope, Eloan whispered bitterly as she washed blood from a child's cheek. You gave them water, Alden. Now Fenn means to turn it to chains. Seraphine Dale appeared days later, cloak pulled tight, voice urgent. The guild backs Fenn. They'll starve the people until they crawl, but if we resist, he'll brand us rebels. The words weighed heavy. Adrian knew she was right. He remembered histories of peasant uprisings crushed beneath armored boots. Yet he also saw the faces of Stonebrook, thin, hungry, but alight with something he had never seen before. The will to fight for what was theirs. Tension ignited in Ravenford itself. Villagers smuggled small sacks of beans under cloaks, whispering Alden's name with both gratitude and fear. Traders began to mutter that Grey March was restless, and in Hymir, reports reached the Crown Exchequer of missing tithe shipments. The storm was growing. One night, as frost settled on the canal, Adrian gathered Bridget, Eloan, Leora, and Seraphine by the water's edge. The moonlight caught their weary faces. They mean to break us, he said. Not by famine, but by law twisted into chains. If we bow now, the canal will mean nothing. If we stand, Bridget slammed her hammer into the mud. Then we stand. Eloan's eyes flashed. For every child who lived because of clean water, Seraphine added, voice low. And for every family the guild has bled dry. Even Leora, usually cautious, lifted her chin. Then your words must travel farther than their lies. Let me write them. Let every village see what you've built. Adrian felt his throat tighten. He had begun as a physicist, chasing knowledge for its own sake. Now he was something else. Leader, target, symbol. He did not ask for it. Yet here, in the cold by the rushing water, he could no longer turn away. The following week, Voss returned, with twice the soldiers. He strode into the square, voice booming. By order of Reeve Godric Fenn, the canal is crown property. Any man who resists forfeits land and life. Adrian stepped forward, mud clinging to his boots. Around him, villagers tightened grips on hoes, spades, and hammers. He met Voss's sneer with calm. The crown did not dig this canal. We did, and we will not surrender it. Gasps rippled. A line had been drawn, bold and irreversible. Voss's grin widened, cruel and eager. Then you've chosen war, boy, and war has a price. The soldiers advanced, cudgels raised. The villagers did not flee this time. They stood shoulder to shoulder, fear burning into resolve. And Adrian, heart hammering, realized the truth. Stonebrook was no longer just a village. It was a spark that could set all Grey March aflame. Baron Harrow's manor, Grey March, the manor's stone walls, loomed over the valley like a fortress against both raiders and peasants alike. For years, Adrian had only glimpsed it from afar, its banners, snapping cold in the wind. Now, after the canal and the skirmishes with Fenn's men, he was summoned within. Villagers whispered warnings. No peasant enters a lord's hall and returns unchanged. Yet Adrian went, because Stonebrook's survival no longer rested in fields and water alone. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from braziers and the low murmur of retainers. Baron Edmund Harrow sat at the high table, his face stern, carved by years of weighing coin against conscience. Beside him stood Lady Isolde Vance, the magistrate of Grey March, her robes plain, but her eyes sharp as a blade. "You are Alden Cross," the Baron began, voice deep and skeptical. "The one who digs rivers where none should flow, the one who defies the reeve." Adrian bowed stiffly, though every instinct fought against bending the knee. "I am Alden, and I did not defy law. I defied hunger." The Baron leaned forward. "Hunger is the crown's concern, not yours. A village cannot play at governance." Before Adrian could answer, Lady Isolde spoke, her tone calm but cutting. "And yet, my lord, his canal feeds hundreds while the reeve hoards grain. Tell me, whose governance is truly at fault?" The room fell silent. Harrow's jaw tightened. "Fenn serves the crown's purse. I serve the crown's peace. If Alden's canal sparks rebellion, it will be both purse and peace that burn." Adrian stepped closer, the weight of every villager's eyes upon him. "My lord, rebellion comes not from bread, but from the absence of it. People will endure taxes. They will endure labor, but they will not endure watching their children starve while barns overflow. I've seen it. I've fought it." Lady Isolde studied him, then placed a parchment on the table. "I have investigated Fenn's levies. His tithe barns bleed more coin than grain. His bailiff uses the cudgel more than the law. If famine spreads, the blame will not stop at Fenn. It will reach this hall, perhaps even the crown." Baron Harrow's eyes flicked to her, then back to Adrian. The tension crackled like a drawn bowstring. "What is it you want?" Harrow asked. Adrian took a breath. In that moment, he felt the full fracture of his life. Adrian the physicist, who once lectured in quiet halls, and Alden the villager standing now before nobility. He chose neither, and both. "I want freedom to finish what we've begun. The canal must expand, new fields must be planted, but Fenn will not allow it. With your protection and Lady Isolde's authority, we can feed Grey March, not just Stonebrook." Harrow frowned, fingers drumming the table. "And what do you give in return? No lord aids a peasant for free." Adrian met his gaze without flinching. "I give you stability. If Grey March eats, Grey March obeys. If it starves, no sword in your armory will hold it." For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Harrow leaned back, exhaling. "You speak like a man older than your years." Isolde's eyes softened just slightly. "Older, perhaps, than his world." The Baron rose. "Very well. I will not defy the reeve openly, not yet. But Stonebrook will have my protection, so long as you keep order. Fail me, and you will find my hall less welcoming." Adrian bowed again, not from submission, but from recognition of the path he had chosen. Politics was not invention. It was a game of shadows and debts, and he had just made his first bargain. As he left the hall, Isolde caught his arm, her voice low enough for only him. "You will be watched now, Alden Cross. By Fen, by the Baron, and by me. Be careful which storms you summon." Outside, the banners of Harrow's house snapped in the wind. For the first time, Adrian felt the village behind him and the weight of nobility above him. He was no longer just a farmer's son with strange ideas. He was a piece on the board, and the board had just expanded beyond anything he had ever imagined. Highmere, capital of Westvale. The royal chancery was a maze of stone corridors and whispered secrets. At its heart, under banners of gold and crimson, Chancellor Severin Cade sat in a chamber lined with ledgers and sealed letters. His fingers traced the ink on a parchment freshly arrived from the Grey March. Reports of famine, reports of rebellion, and most troubling of all, reports of a peasant boy who dared to carve rivers into the land. Cade's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Alden Cross," he murmured. "The name appears too often to be ignored." Across the room, a shadow shifted. Lady Callista Moran, spymaster to the crown, leaned against a pillar. Draped in dark velvet, her eyes gleamed with the cold patience of a hawk. "I have read the same reports. A canal that feeds hundreds. Villagers, defying Fen's men. Even Baron Harrow and Magistrate Vance lending him shelter." She tilted her head. "One might think a new power rises in Grey March." Cade's gaze hardened. "Power does not rise from mud, yet it seems mud has found a tongue." He tapped the parchment. "A peasant who commands loyalty is more dangerous than a rebel army. Armies can be bought, broken. Loyalty spreads like fire." Callista smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we should let him burn. Fire draws out weakness. It forces men to show their true faces." The Chancellor considered her words. "Or it consumes what we need." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "The Crown cannot tolerate disorder, nor can we allow Fen's incompetence to soil our coffers. If Alden Cross threatens both famine and rebellion, then he must be understood, used, or crushed." Callista stepped closer, the hem of her gown whispering across the stone. "I can ride north quietly, see him for myself. Men reveal more to a kind smile than to a soldier's blade." Cade nodded slowly. "Go then. But remember, if he is a fool, expose him. If he is a threat, end him. And if he is what these villagers believe—" His voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as glass. "Then perhaps we have found a tool sharp enough to cut our enemies and blunt enough to never see the hand that wields it." Far away, in Stonebrook, Adrian felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing against his back. Leora noted how strangers now lingered longer in the market. Seraphine whispered of guild messengers arriving unannounced. Even Bridget muttered that she saw riders on the ridge at dusk. One evening, as the canal reflected a blood-red sunset, Elowen stood beside Adrian. "Something stirs beyond our fields. I feel it, like a storm waiting to break." Adrian looked at the flowing water, at the fragile shoots pushing through the soil. The canal had saved them from hunger, but it had also done more. It had drawn the gaze of men and women who ruled kingdoms, not villages. For the first time, he understood the scale of the board he stood upon. He was no longer only Adrian Cross, physicist lost in time, no longer only Alden Cross, peasant who saved a village. Now he was a name written in the halls of power, and names, once written, could never be erased. Seabridge Road, Grey March snow, whipped across the road, a cruel reminder that famine did not end with the harvest. A line of weary refugees wound its way into Stonebrook, their steps heavy, their eyes hollow. They carried little more than rags and memories. Among them walked a tall woman with a straight back despite the cold, her hair tangled by sea winds, her gaze unflinching. In her arms she carried a child not her own, pressing a crust of bread into his hands, though she herself had none left to eat. Adrian watched from the edge of the square, struck by the quiet authority in her movements. Not defiance, not despair, something else. Leadership born of necessity. When she saw him, she spoke without hesitation. "Gwyneth Calder, Seabridge is lost. Fire, hunger, the guild's neglect. We scattered. Some followed me here." Her voice was rough yet steady. "If you'll have us, we will work, we will build, but we will not beg," the villagers whispered. Strangers meant more mouths, but also more hands. Elowen stepped forward first, her cloak pulled tight. "We have herbs and clean water. You'll be tended," Bridget added with a nod. "And tools enough, if you can wield them." Gwyneth's eyes softened, just slightly. "I've wielded worse than tools." Later, by the fire, she told fragments of her story. How Seabridge's markets emptied, how parents bartered children for grain, how she rallied women and old men to organize. Fishing boats, until even the sea froze them out. She did not embellish, did not weep. She simply laid bare what survival demanded. Adrian listened, feeling both admiration and unease. Here was someone who had led when all else failed. Someone who did not look to him as savior, but as equal. In her, he recognized a reflection, another life shaped by catastrophe, another soul forced to turn knowledge into survival. When she rose, the firelight caught her profile, strong, resolute. "Your canal saved this village," she said. "But survival is not enough. You need a vault, a shield against the next famine. I can help you build it. I know what it means to ration, to store, to command when fear eats at men's hearts." Adrian nodded slowly. In that moment, Stonebrook gained more than refugees. It gained a commander forged in the ashes of Seabridge, and Adrian felt the circle tighten. His village was no longer alone. The storm of hunger had brought him another ally, perhaps the most unyielding yet. Ravenford, Grey March. The market town of Ravenford had always been the hinge of trade in Grey March, grain changing hands under the guild's heavy thumb, taxes skimmed until the farmers bled. Now, after famine and blight, its barns stood half empty and its people half broken. Yet into this hollow place, Adrian carried a vision not of markets, but of safety. He stood in the square beside Gwyneth Calder, Bridget Ashdown, and Seraphine Dale. Behind them, carts creaked under sacks of barley and beans salvaged from the canals. Fields. The crowd shifted nervously. Farmers clutched their seed bags as if they were children. No one wanted to give up their last hope of survival. Adrian raised his hands. "We have built water where there was none. But water alone cannot carry us through the next famine. We must have a vault, a place where grain is guarded, counted, and kept for all, not stolen by the guild, not rotting in the damp." Murmurs swept the square. Some muttered suspicion, others fear. Then Gwyneth's voice cut sharp as steel. "I watched Seabridge fall because there was no vault. Each man hid his own sack, each family hoarded. When the last crumb was gone, no one had strength to stand together. Stonebrook will not share that fate, nor Ravenford, not while I draw breath." Her words struck like a hammer. Farmers glanced at one another, shame mingling with determination. Slowly the first sacks were carried forward, then more. The work began that very week. Bridget oversaw the forge, crafting locks and hinges. Master Rowan Hale set beams deep into the earth, sealing the foundation against rot. Leora recorded every measure with a precision that made even merchants uneasy. Adrian designed vents for airflow, recalling lessons of storage silos and moisture control, shaping medieval timber into something far ahead of its time. There were challenges. Rats chewed at the edges. A storm tore shingles from the roof. And, Once in the dead of night, Bram and Osric tried to pry open the half-finished doors. They were caught by villagers before they could flee. This time, the people did not beg for mercy. They stood firm, declaring that the vault was no man's prize. It was the spine of their survival. When the doors finally closed, heavy and sealed, with iron, the sense in the air was unlike anything Adrian had felt before. Not just relief, not just hope. Ownership. For the first time, Ravenford and Stonebrook shared more than hunger. They shared a future. Adrian looked at Gwyneth, at Brigid, at Seraphine, at Leora and Elowyn nearby. Women who had once been scattered threads were now a woven cord of strength. He felt it deep within. The vault was more than stone and timber. It was proof that knowledge and unity could outlast fear. But even as cheers rose, he noticed Callista Moran's messengers lingering at the edge of the square, their cloaks too fine, their questions too sharp. The vault might shield them from a famine, but nothing yet shielded them from the crown. Stonebrook, Grey March, the Ravenford grain vault had barely settled into its first silence when a new figure rode into the village. Cloaked in black velvet, flanked by two silent riders, Lady Callista Moran dismounted with the ease of someone who knew her presence alone was a weapon. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Spymaster. Her name carried weight even among peasants who had never seen the halls of Hymir. Adrian felt the air tighten. This was no soldier, no taxman. This was the crown's knife in silk. She approached the vault, gloved hand brushing its iron-bound doors as if testing their strength. "Impressive," she said softly, her voice carrying like a blade. "A structure built not by noble decree, but by the will of villagers. Tell me, Alden Cross, do you mean to build a kingdom of your own?" The question hung sharp, impossible to answer safely. Around them, villagers stiffened. Brigid's hand twitched toward her hammer. Gwyneth narrowed. Her eyes. Adrian forced himself calm. "I build so no child goes hungry," he said, meeting her gaze. "Not kingdoms, not thrones, just life." Callista's smile was thin, unreadable. "Life has a price. Loyalty has a higher one. You've won both, it seems." She leaned closer, her words meant for his ears alone. "The Chancellor watches. The King listens. Choose carefully, Alden. One misstep and the canal, the vault, even Stonebrook itself, gone like smoke." She turned, mounting her horse in a fluid motion. "For now I will report what I see. A clever man, a dangerous man. The question is, dangerous to whom?" Her riders wheeled, hooves churning mud. In moments, the spymaster was gone, leaving only the echo of her words. Adrian stood rooted, heart pounding. He had faced hunger, disease, and the wrath of petty lords. But this was different. The game now stretched far beyond fields and canals. He looked at the vault, at the faces of those who trusted him. And he knew. The storm was no longer just in Grey March. It was in Hymir, in the crown itself, and it had already begun to close in. Stonebrook Square, grey March snow drifted across the square when the king's herald arrived. His cloak bore the crimson seal of Hymir, and behind him rattled a chest of scrolls, heavy with wax and ribbon. The villagers gathered, eyes wide with fear and awe. The herald unrolled the parchment, voice ringing clear. "By decree of King Alaric reigned the Four, Alden Cross is offered the title of Overseer of Agricultural Works for Grey March. With office comes stipend, authority, and the crown's recognition. He is summoned to Hymir to take seat among the overseers." Gasps rippled through the crowd. To the peasants of Stonebrook, it sounded like a miracle, from dirt to throne room, from canal builder to royal official. Mothers whispered that their children would never starve again, but Adrian felt the weight like iron chains. He saw the trap beneath the gilding. To leave Stonebrook was to abandon it. To sit in Hymir was to become a tool of the same court that starved its provinces. The herald raised his chin. Do you accept, Alden Cross? The silence was absolute. Adrian's heart pounded. He thought of his old life, of chalkboards and sterile halls, of how ambition had once stolen every scrap of love from him. Then he thought of Maeve, Elin, Tomlin, of Eloin's faith, Bridget's fire, Leora's patience, Seraphine's defiance, Gwyneth's resolve. He stepped forward, his voice cut through the cold air. Tell your king this. I did not dig rivers to serve a throne. I built them for children to live. My place is here. The herald froze, stunned. Murmurs surged through the square, some fearful, some jubilant. Callista Moran, watching from her horse at the edge, allowed herself the faintest of smiles, half intrigue, half warning. Adrian turned back to his people. His refusal was not pride. It was choice, the clearest of his life. Stonebrook, grey March spring, returned, cautious and green, as if the land itself was testing whether it was safe to breathe again. The Aster Canal shimmered in the morning light, carrying life through fields that once reeked of rot. Beside it rose the Ravenford grain vault, doors iron-bound, a promise carved into timber and stone. Adrian Alden walked the path with his family. Maeve's hands, lined but steady, carried a basket of early shoots. Elin hummed a tune, skirts brushing wildflowers, while Tomlin skipped ahead, laughing for the first time in years. Around them moved those who had once been only faces in a crowd, Eloin with her herbs, Bridget with her hammer, Leora with her ink, Seraphine with her defiance, Gwyneth with her unyielding gaze. Not rivals, not strangers. Wives, allies, pillars of the life he had built. Villagers waved as he passed, not as subjects to a lord, but as neighbours greeting their own. And in that simple gesture, Adrian felt what he had chased all his life yet. Never caught in lecture halls or sterile labs. Belonging. At the ridge above the fields he paused. The canal curved like a silver vein, the vault squatted solid against the horizon. He thought of the king's offer, the throne room he would never see, the crown he would never wear. He thought of Project Kronos, of the accident that had ripped him from one world to another, and for the first time he did not wonder if he should go back. Behind him, hooves struck the road. A lone rider galloped toward Hymir, dust rising in the light. The crown still watched. The game of power was not done. But for now, Adrian turned to the village, to the women at his side, to the laughter of children. "Here," he whispered, "this is enough." The canal flowed on, carrying both water and memory into a future no king could ever fully command. And so Alden Cross, once Adrian, the lonely man of science, chose not the throne nor the crown, but the warmth of family, the strength of his people, and the meaning of a life lived for others. The river he carved still flows, a reminder that knowledge alone is not enough. What endures is love, hope, and the courage to stand when the world begins to fall. Perhaps in Stonebrook he finally found what he had searched for all his life. If this story moved you, if you found a piece of yourself in Alden's journey, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends who love science fiction, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories of humanity, hope and survival in distant times and places. Thank you for listening.